I must tell you, first of all, and I don't mean this in any disingenuous way, I'm very humble to be before you today. I was just telling my friend Rolf, he sees me teach every day, and I knew he wouldn't believe me. I said, you know, I'm really nervous, Rolf. And he said, come on. I said, you don't ever get nervous. But this is different. You're my colleagues. I admire you. I don't know, honestly, whether I deserve your admiration, and that's not false humility. It's a lot easier to snooker 18-year-olds than the group I'm looking at now. So I am very, very humbled by this opportunity. As Richard mentioned, my arrival at Weber was difficult. This was a bad time for hiring. Has that changed? I got out of my graduate program in the mid-1970s. There were no jobs in academia. Well, no, there were some, but it was difficult. And indeed, figured that I had taken all that time to become a PhD historian so that I could be a carpenter. Had a friend in the business, and that's what I began to do. But he's already told you the story. For 6 years, I came to Ogden from Bountiful, where I was living, and taught part-time. I had, I think, 2 one-year contracts and some part-time contracts. And during that time, I fell absolutely in love with teaching. It's next to my wife and my kids, my great love. And if I get a little emotional, that's okay. I'm getting old. You can just chalk it up to the age factor. But it's literally true, and I hope it's true for all of you, my dear colleagues, that when you stand in front of a class, that's a great time. That's an exciting time. That's a time that fills you with, I guess, unspeakable joy, because you're there with an opportunity to change some lives, to get some people to see some things maybe they don't see. That moves me every day when I walk into the classroom. And I'm always a little amused, and I promised Adam that I would make a few people angry today, so I'll work on that now. I'm always amused and a little bemused when I talk with colleagues who tell me things like, I can't wait to get out of this place. I can't wait to retire. You know, I really don't like to teach. I really don't like my job, because I love my job. And I love it so much that I get overwhelmed by it, and my wife's angry at me constantly for accepting teaching assignments that I wind up with things like 400 students fall semester 2010. Makes Richard Sadler happy and Susan Matt happy, but Chantal Sessions very unhappy. So I've got my priorities mixed up someplace. But that's the honest truth. And if there's anything I could tell you today that you might remember, because most of it you won't, is that I love being a teacher. I love being a professor. It was my dream from the time I was a young student, when I really did look like this on a good day, until this moment. There was a time during those years when Richard was running for faculty senate year after year, and a couple of years where they had to take, was it Richard, 2-3 votes? It was so close because the controversies were so high. I go sit in the back of those senate meetings and just literally holding my hands like this, hoping that Richard would win. Not because I liked him very much. I didn't know Richard very much. Didn't know the issues. I wasn't engaged politically. But because I was afraid that my opportunity to teach at the university level was going to disappear. And of course, during those years, I wasn't stupid. I was making applications all over the country. I got into a few final threes and went to a couple of interviews and was not successful. So this was where my dreams were, and it was a great place to be because I grew up a mile from here, as you heard Richard mention. My brother Dee, who's here today, and I grew up just a mile from here. My daughter lives in the home I grew up in and teaches part-time in the zoology department here at Weber. And I've always had great affection for this institution. But over the past 35 years, it has become pathological. I was talking to a woman at the junior high a couple of nights ago, and she made the mistake of mentioning something about how unfortunate it was that BYU was having a bad season. And I proceeded to tell her that she had no business living in Ogden, caring one way or the other. That she should be worried about what was happening up at Wildcat Stadium. And it's become, as I say, pathological. Well, let me go on from my biography, which I'm sure is not as exciting to you as it is to me, and try to tell you what I think might be of some use to you, my dear colleagues, from my 35 years of being at Weber. And as Richard said, and I think I'm not going to be humble about this, I've been very successful as a teacher. When I was in the 10th grade, and I was 18 years old. This was taken, I think, in September of 1964. Might have been October. I was a freshman at Weber when that picture was taken. I can remember the studio where it was taken and so on, and I'm pretty sure it was early fall. But I know it was a freshman year. But a couple of years before that, I had arrived at Ogden High School, and I was not a particularly good student. I knew I wasn't stupid, but I was not interested, to be really flat honest with you. Nothing had happened to me since maybe the 5th grade that caused me to be terribly interested in becoming an educated person. I was lazy. I didn't particularly find the things that people do in public school interesting. And I had not done much homework. And I was on my way to graduating from Ogden High with a 1.8 GPA. That's the truth. Anyway, I arrived at Ogden High School then with a fairly bad attitude about education. I didn't think much about the outcome of that, that I might wind up whatever, because I wasn't going to be an educated person. It didn't dawn on me. It's not my parents' fault. 4 boys, 3 of us with college degrees, and have done very, very well, finally, out of us. But my mother was a wonderful woman, and I'm not blaming anybody. I'm not blaming the teachers. I'm not blaming anybody. I'm blaming myself for this. Anyway, I walked into the very first class at Ogden High School, and it was homeroom. Some kid had just slammed me up against the locker and told me I was ugly and a sophomore, and he was going to find me later and beat the crap out of me. I know who that kid is. He's become quite an important citizen of Ogden, and I won't mention his name. I had pimples. I had unruly hair that you couldn't do anything with. My mother shaved it off a few times and told me that I had a funny shaped head, so I had to put the hair back. And as you've noticed from the photograph, I had these rather prominent ears. They're still there. My face just grew into them. My dad told me I looked like a taxi cab coming down the road with the doors open. I was not athletic. I was gangly and uncoordinated. I tried to do a little bit athletic, this and that, and was always picked last. So I would I'm not trying to, get you to get your violins out. I mean, I was heading for a bad place. I really was, and it was my fault, despite these whatever physical problems. Wasn't stupid. I knew it wasn't stupid. It wasn't that I was thinking that way. Anyway, here's my introduction to Ogden High School. Into the room comes a guy wearing a suit. And he was certainly a teacher. He had a crew cut. He was older than the rest of us. A neck about that big around, and a head the size of a small coconut. I can still remember him. He walked in, he sat on the desk He looked around at us. And by the way, this I'll never forget. Somebody had drawn a hand on my desk with only one finger on it. He walked in, and here's what he said. As best I can remember it over 50 years now, here's what he said. This here's homeroom. My name's Mr. My brother knows who it is. Blank. This here's world history. Now I got to tell you right now, I don't know nothing about world history. I never took no history in college. I'm the wrestling coach here. But there weren't no more driver education classes, so they give me this here. My brother's telling his wife all about this guy, because my brother was athletic and wrestled for him. Well, you can imagine my chagrin. Even though I was not a good student and didn't care much, I did go to school. I never sloughed. I don't know, I just was that kind of kid. I went to school, sat, bored, didn't learn, sat there. But I can remember thinking, well, what are we going to do in here for a year? And the PA system came on, and some announcements came, and we spent the first day, I don't know, filling out papers if your parents worked at Hillfield, and I don't know, whatever else you filled out. And left, and I went to the rest of the classes, and I don't remember much about the others, but I came back the next day, and here's what happened. I'm not crossing my fingers, and some of you are going to be nodding your heads. We'd all gone down and gotten our books, and they looked something like this. Big, heavy, only not new like this one. He said, all right, open your books to page 1. So I opened my book to page 1. Let me find the page 1 in here because I have to read it to you to make sure you get it. Start reading. Now the kid who sat right here where Adam is at Ogden High could never read. Don't know why, but that's where he sat, the kid who couldn't read. So here's how it went. Let me get my old man glasses out. New World Conquest, and the kid next, Conquest, sparked, and pretty soon everybody in the room is doing it. As we went from word to word to word to word. Now some other things happened that year in that room. Every now and then he'd bring in some mimeograph paper, and we'd all smell the ink real quick, and then we'd put them down, and they had blanks to fill in. You know, Columbus sailed the ocean blue in blank. I'd put down, just to be, snotty, water. And then we found out that this guy, and Dee, you may remember about this guy. By the way, he's still alive. I saw him, maybe he's died, but I saw him not too long ago, this teacher. We found out he liked cats. He had cats. And so we'd get him talking about cats. And that was nice, because then we didn't have to read up and down the aisles with the other kids. And of course, sports. He was an assistant football coach. So if we had a football game or a wrestling meet, somebody'd say, hey, coach, what do you think? And he'd start talking about sports. Well, my friends, I learned absolutely, listen to me, nothing in 180 days in that room for 1 hour. And I was there every single day, and I learned nothing. Okay? Now, some of you are saying, well, gosh, am I glad I'm better than that wrestling coach. I mean, I'm much better. Well, I know you are. And I know every one of you is better than the wrestling coach was. But I want to ask you why he failed. That's the title of the talk. Well, then you can't make this stuff up. I'll get to that in a minute. But why he failed? He failed as a teacher. He failed miserably. He may have been, I don't remember. D, was he a good wrestling coach? I don't remember. Was he a good assistant football coach? I don't remember. Was he a wonderful human being? I don't know. But as a teacher, he was an abject, utter, complete, miserable failure. Why? And I've thought about it a lot over the years, because just to get biographical again for a second, what happened to me is I came to Weber. And when Richard was introducing me, he didn't mention somebody called Dello Dayton. Some of you remember Dello? We remember him as a administrator. Tony Spanos shoots up a hand. Remember Dello? Tony doesn't look old enough to remember Dello, but he's old enough. Believe me, he's hiding it well, but he's old enough. I got into a class with Dello Dayton, and it was a class I wasn't supposed to be in. And by the way, you say, well, how'd you go? How'd you get to Weber if you graduate from Ogden High with a 1.8? Friends, then and now, anybody can come to Weber. You've noticed? You notice? Every day. I was chair of the Senate once when Bob Smith tried to change that, and we put an index together. Remember that, some of you? Start, having entrance requirements at Weber. Well, I don't know. I'm glad we don't. I happen to like it the way it is. But I came here because that's what everybody else is doing. I had anything else to do. I didn't want to go to work. And my dad was willing to pay the $90 a year tuition, so I came to Weber. And look, I'm not going to tell you this in detail, because all of you have the same story, and you could tell it better than I can in your own case. Something lit the fire, started to burn. And I started to want to learn. And I started to learn because I wanted to learn. And let me tell you about Dello Dayton. You guys who remember him as an administrator may not remember this, but one thing about Dello, and I know Richard knows this guy knew history. He knew it upside, downside, side to side, through and through. He knew history. There was no question you could ask Dr. Dayton, that he didn't know or know where to send you to find an answer. And it was always intriguing. It was always curious. It was always something. And the fire started to burn. And it's been burning ever since. And that's a magical moment. It's a mystery when that happens. And some of you say, well, maybe that was Dayton. Maybe Dello earned from you the fire starter. I don't know. I really don't. Something happened. Something started the fire burning. But let me take you back to why the wrestling coach failed for a second. Because we're often told, don't deliver your message from the negative, deliver from the positive. But using him as an example, let's talk about what he was doing wrong. Okay, first of all, by his own admission, and it was pretty obvious as we went along, he didn't know anything about his subject. He didn't know anything. The guy was empty-headed when it came to history. He may have known every tricky wrestling maneuver there was. He may have known every great football play there was. He may have known who knows what else, but he didn't know anything about his subject. So if I can say another thing that I hope you remember, and I've said this in teaching and learning forum workshops before to adjuncts and others when I've been asked, know your stuff. My friends, know your stuff. Take the time to know your stuff. Don't go in there and bluff them. Don't go in there and have them read the books up and down the aisles. And I promised my friend Gail, who's responsible for me being here, I'm going to get even later. She nominated me for this. I'm going to take a shot at PowerPoint. Here it is. Don't stand in front of your class and get their heads going up and down while they read your PowerPoint. Next slide, please. Blah, 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 blah. Next slide, please. Blah, blah. PowerPoint's great. I'm not opposed to it. Show them the pictures. Put your notes on the board. It's easier to read than your handwriting on the chalkboard. I'm not speaking against that. But let's not get into the routine where we're counting on something else. A PowerPoint presentation, a book, a handout, a film, to tell your students what you don't know. Now that's being a little rude, but I'm pressing the envelope on that issue. Know your stuff. Dr. Dayton knew his stuff. And then I was blessed over the course of the next few years when I kept going to college, because I was excited now and getting A's and loving it, that I met a whole lot of other people who knew their stuff. And it was amazing to sit in those places and know that those people knew what they knew. And I wanted to know what they knew. I had a burning desire to know what they knew. And sometimes I didn't agree with what they thought they knew. I decided they were wrong about what they knew. Because not all what we know is true, is it? But we know it anyway. And that's powerful stuff. Let me shift gears a second to get to another point. Had an opportunity, as Richard has mentioned, to travel around the country on buses with school teachers and with community folks. We've done both. And recently, we've been doing that in connection with the Larry H. Miller Education Project. Larry Miller put his money where his mouth was and wanted public education to be better, and particularly about history. And so he got Richard and me and some others involved in taking teachers to the historic sites and helping them. And once again, to kind of teach from the negative for a bit here, Larry died, and his family said, we want to keep doing this, but without his guidance, I think Richard and I agree, things changed a little bit. They started bringing in these folks who, and let me gore some more oxen here. I'll watch some of you give me a dirty look as I say this. We've got all these people who want to teach the teachers how to teach, pedagogy specialists. And I've sat on several Masters of Education committees over the years and listened to people who know all the things I don't know about the science and the art of teaching. And I've never taken an education class. I don't speak ill of the College of Education. Don't take it that way. But last summer, had a busload of teachers from all across the state, and we were traveling from the Washington, D.C. area to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, to spend a day there to look at the site of that great battle in early July 1863. And the person who'd been sent along to teach the teachers how to teach was behind. He had not presented all the material that he had to present. And so as we were driving along the Blue Ridge, the mountain that concealed the movement of Lee's troops into Pennsylvania in June of '63 so they could make that big sweep and take Washington from the north. I was sitting there with a mic in my hand, and it was shaking because I wanted to tell them so much about that event. And to say, look at those mountains. It was a shield to that great movement of man, and what a bold maneuver by General Lee. And instead, 40 teachers had their faces in books, filling out strategies about how to teach. And I was just ready for the loony bin by the time we got off the bus. Because my view is that somehow, if you know your stuff, and I know a lot of you who know more about pedagogical studies, my friend Dr. McKay, who's spent years and years looking into this, will disagree, but I'm going to say it anyway. That's going to happen. You're going to figure it out. You're going to figure out how to get that to those students. Now let me bring you to another point. As part of this process of dealing with teachers, had an opportunity to sit down to dinner, my wife and I, with David McCulloch, the great popular historian. And some of my colleagues, well, he's a popularizer, but, that's because Brady Broward has published a book that might get read by 40 people. Only 30 will actually finish it, Brady, but the other 40. And McCulloch writes books read by millions. And so we all, Stephen, and I can see him out there, well, he's just a popularizer. But I had an opportunity to sit with him, and one of the things he likes to say, and I stole it from him today, is, you historians, you teachers of history, how can you lose? You can't make this stuff up. You can't make this stuff up. And then he proceeds to tell stories from the history of the world where the most remarkable things have happened, that you couldn't make them up if you wrote a novel. And in fact, the way he put it to me once, he said, and this is the story, he said, take a look at the relationship between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. Just their relationship, how they became friends, how they collaborated on the Declaration of Independence. Then they became bitter political rivals, and they became nasty personal enemies when Jefferson did everything he could to ruin Adams' presidency, and then went on to be president. Adams went home bitter and full of hatred for his former friend. And then they become friends again. I mean, even that much of the story. You can't make this stuff up. I mean, this is great. You people who tape soap operas, go home this afternoon. It's not that good. And then get a load of this. These two guys become friends again, and they start writing letters to one another, and they become dear friends again, and they're disagreeing still, but dear friends again. And on the 4th of July, 1826, exactly 50 years from the day the Declaration of Independence they had written, more than anyone, those two, was published to the world, both of them died. Jefferson in Virginia and Adams in Massachusetts. And when John Adams died, his last words were, "At least Mr. Jefferson still lives." Jefferson had been dead for 2 hours in Virginia. You can't make this stuff up. Now, some of you are saying, yeah, but you historians, my friend Hanley here is always telling me, try teaching business management courses. You can't tell stories, and he's right. I wouldn't ever try that. But Bruce makes more money than I do. But every one of you, whatever it is you teach, if it's finance or business management or zoology or botany or microbiology or psychology, I mean, let's go through the whole 250 disciplines we have at Weber. You love your discipline. It's got drama. It's exciting. It moves you. That's why you got involved in it. If it doesn't, and you don't know why you got involved in it, go do something else. My guess is that's how you feel about it. I'm convinced that even, well, maybe not Bruce, but even a business management class can be just as exciting as the story I just told you about John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. You can't make this stuff up. I was in awe last year to sit in this room or next door, wherever it was, when my friend Craig Oberg delivered his last lecture. And he's still here, so yes, it wasn't his last lecture, but
I tried.
You tried. Yeah. I was in awe, Craig, because, and I told my wife last night when I was trying to feel better about coming here today and so nervous about it, I said, Craig set a high standard. And the way Craig did that, as I remember him doing it so well, and I had him come and do it again for the Weber Historical Society, is he told us how the fire burned in him for microbiology. And not only for micro, but all the other things that interest Craig. I mean, Craig drives me nuts. He's always asking me historical questions, and I don't know. I don't know my stuff well enough to answer the stuff he asks me about. But he's just full of a burning curiosity about the world. And obviously, first of all, how these stupid little microbes function. I could care less. But he finds that exciting. And because he does, he's a great teacher. And when people say, who's the best teacher at Weber? Oh, somebody will say, it's you, Sessions, or it's somebody. I always say, there's no question, it's Craig Oberg is the greatest teacher at Weber. And I chalk that up, not to his gleaming personality, but to the love he has for knowledge. He wants to know everything, this guy. Drives you nuts what he wants to know. Now, I'm one who believes, and I may be naive, I'm 64 years old, I'm as dumb as I was here, maybe, when it comes to common sense. But I'm one who believes this is all contagious. If you're full of this fire for what jacks you up, whatever the subject is, the kids are going to get it. And we say kids, we should. The students, because so many of our students are certainly not kids at Weber. The students are going to get it. They're going to catch it. They're going to catch on fire. And as I look back over my past, again, I can't say it was Dello Dayton. I can't say it was anybody who lit the flame. Something lit it. Might not have been a person. Probably wasn't a person in that case. When that fire starts to burn, you can't put it out. Gail said to me, my friend Gail Nicholson, and by the way, I was on the committee that hired Gail, and I can tell you that there was no competition when we hired Gail to come to work at Weber. And she's turned out to be such an incredible asset to Weber State University, so that was one of our good ones. I've been on some other committees, I won't mention, but Gail was one of the great hires. And she said, you know, you and I once had a great conversation about student-centered learning. And that's why I recommended to Adam that you be the one to give the last lecture. I didn't say this to Gail. I wrote back and said, okay, well, I'll think about it. But you know what, Gail, I don't have any damn idea what that is. I don't know what that is. I'm a storyteller. And I even tell my students at the beginning of classes, I'm going to tell you a lot of stories. Some of them might even be true. And a few of them catch on, like a few of you did at that. Online education presented a problem for me. And this, I think, is where Gail mistakenly thought that I had come on to something that would be of use to you in this regard. Because when you do online, you don't get a chance, unless you do like my friend Stephen Francis, who's taped his lectures and this and that, and I've got some video that they see. You don't get a chance to be what Dr. McKay would call the sage on the stage, as opposed to the guide on the side. You don't get a chance to get up and be your big dramatic self. And so for me, getting involved in online about 14 years ago, I think I taught the very first online class at Weber, presented a real problem, and that was, if what makes me successful, and I believed then and believe I am now as a teacher, is that I've got this passion, this fire, and I can tell stories, I can make them laugh, and I can get them fired up. How are they going to do that in an online class? And I think that's what Gail was talking about as we talked back and forth. And I think the answer to that, and if this helps answer your hopes, Gail, is that you still have the opportunity to burrow into that student's brain and try to get the fire kindled. It doesn't have to be because you tell good jokes or you have a nice presence on the stage. It's still an opportunity to get that person fired up about learning. Now, Gail, isn't that what you mean by student-centered learning? When the fire's burning in here and the student then becomes centered on understanding and learning and figuring out what's going on. As I've traveled with these teachers and listened to teacher ed people on the Masters of Ed committees and these pedagogy specialists who've come on these trips with us, I hear terms like enduring understandings and engagement. And I know what all those words mean, and I believe in the reality of what those pedagogical masters are trying to convey. But I'm just not sure that it's something that transcends basically just this simple final point that I want to make. And I'll pass the mic back to whoever wants it. When you're teaching, it seems to me that the biggest question that should be on your mind is this: why should my students know what I'm asking them to know? Why? That's my last point, my friends. If you're standing in front of your students or sitting down with them or working with them online or however you are teaching them, all legitimate ways to teach, and you have no more reason for what you're asking them to learn than that they have to be able to tell you on a test what you've just taught them, then you're the wrestling coach. You're failing because they're not going to get it. Because unless a student has a reason to know, she ain't going to get it. She's not going to learn it. I went through 12 years of public education, 13 counting kindergarten, although I was a pretty good kindergartner. I was okay in kindergarten. Went through all those years, and what was wrong is, and it was my fault, I didn't know why I should know any of that stuff. And I think back, a lot of the teachers I had, they were trying to tell me stuff I did need to know, but I didn't know why. And if you can get your students to know why should they learn the periodic table? I met a kid the other day who's 11 years old who can recite the periodic table. And he's not a savant, he's a normal little kid. I can't tell you why he knows that, but I said, okay, do it. And he went right down to Einsteinium or whatever it ends. Why should those micro students know all the different classifications of microbes that there are in the universe in a 10-10 class? And we picked on a couple of sciences. I mean, we could pick on the rest. Why should students know that Columbus sailed the ocean blue on the water? Whatever the answer is. If there's no reason for them to know it, maybe you think there is, but if you can't convey the reason to them, you're the wrestling coach. You might as well have them read up and down the rows because they're not going to learn it. You're going to spend 180 or however many days we spend, 45, 41, 46. I went to a meeting the other day. We're trying to equalize the semesters. And you're wasting their time. And you're wasting your time. That's pretty simplistic. And I know a lot of you can walk out of here and say, I knew that's about what we get out of sessions. Well, I didn't promise more. Let me finish with one last thing. Among the great blessings of being who I've been for 35 years is the great friends that I have at Weber State University. Friendship means a lot to me. I think all of us think about our friends and the people whom we care about and the ups and downs of friendships and how we feel betrayed by some friends and other things like that. But I just wanted to pay tribute to my friends who are here. And I'm going to mention some at the risk of someone else saying, well, what about me? Well, if you think that way, then you know you're one of these people. But I want to mention a few. Years ago when I was a young professor, I was sitting in a meeting of some sort in the education building, and this scruffy looking blonde kid with all kinds of curly hair come walking in, kind of dumb looking with glasses, and sat down next to me, and we started talking. Became friends on the spot. And that was Craig Oberg. Been friends ever since. And by friends I mean people who we do things for one another. I was moving my household from Bountiful to Ogden, and without even asking, Craig shows up with his crappy old truck and spent 2 days helping me move. That's the kind of friend I'm talking about. In the fall of 1964, when I looked something like this on a good day, I came to a football game at Weber. I was a freshman, and I'd lived a mile away. I used to walk over and see them play basketball and all this sort of thing over here anyway, but I parked my car. There was a road that came right up past buildings 1, 2, 3, and 4, and that's where everybody liked to park. And I parked my car right there, and I got out of my car and I looked over, and here was this great big dumb-looking guy I recognized immediately as my childhood idol, Bruce Hanley, who had been the high school football player at Ogden High, and all of us worshiped Bruce Hanley. Now that I think about it, I probably wouldn't have, but when I was a kid. 4 years older, boy, there's Bruce Hanley. So I caught up with him and I said, hey, Bruce. He looked at me like, yeah. Little snot-nosed kid. We grew up within spitting distance of each other. Often I spit on his yard. And we hiked up the stairs together to the stadium. There was a big, long, rickety wooden staircase. Some of you remember this, who were around then. We hiked up those stairs together. We didn't sit together, but he was very kind to me and asked me what I was doing and vice versa. Little did I know that years later I'd be on a committee at Weber and would sit down next to Bruce, and we'd start working together, and despite our differences, we would become very close friends. And Bruce and I are very, very, very close friends. He has shown up with his rickety truck at my house to help me move my trash, and I've shown up at his house with my rickety body to help him move his trash. Richard Ulibarri. Richard hired me to be the director at the Davis campus. I was scared of Richard. He was a famous guy with power. I went to work for him, and right away we started having disagreements, but every time we did, he'd say, "But you know what, you're right." And he'd grin at me and keep doing it. Just don't tell anybody. You know, do it, that kind of thing. And Richard and I became very close friends. Cherish your friendships at Weber State. This is a great place. It's got a big heart. The people here who work with you, who serve with you, are great people. I love Weber. I love what I do. I hope you've been rewarded for spending this few minutes with me. I, again, approached it with great humility. And if I've seemed over the top here and there, well, it's just my nature. Good luck to you all. Become great, great teachers if you're not already. And if you are, become even better. Thank you.